Heather Pagano, welcome to Writers in Relationship.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to talk. One, because I was actually the editor on your story this time, so I am super excited to hear a little bit about that. But also just because we've known each other for a long time, and it's just fun to have a different context to talk and to talk about writing through a slightly different lens. So I just wondered if you might start out just sharing a little bit about our connection, how we know each other, and your story of that.
Yeah, we met on an accountability group, which I think is a really important thing for writers. It's like my week is not a week if I haven't checked in with my accountability group. Um, and we were on Inked Voices with an accountability group, and that's where we met. And I kept hearing about all these amazing fun projects you were doing. You're always doing something, plastering the town with posters. You've always got some like really exciting project going on. And I'm like, half of me is saying, wow, that sounds really cool. Half of me is saying, I don't have the energy to do that. And then when you reached out about Hodgepodge, I was like, oh, I'm not going to miss out on this one. This is a cool project that doesn't involve going around town and putting up posters. I don't need any I don't need to be able to draw or make costumes or do anything crazy. So I was super excited about it. So that's how we connected first as writers, and also when we were writers, we did lots of feedback exchanges too, which were super helpful. And you jumped right in, even though I had like really long fantasy stories, and you weren't necessarily a fantasy writer. You were totally on board with jumping into that, which I really appreciated. And you always had really good comments. So first as writers, then as editors.
And I think you actually, Heather, were the first exposure I had to, well, other than like Harry Potter, but to like contemporary fantasy as a genre. And you helped me understand that if it's good, I like it.
Yay.
Because I'm a fan. I'm a super duper fan of your work, and I do remember that. I remember some of those earlier stories and being just like, oh my God, this is so cool. She wove in this like magical element, and it brought me back to my childhood and how I loved those books back then. So that's great that you mentioned that. Just tell us a little bit about your setting, like where you are and any relationship with that setting that you.
Where I am in the world. So I've moved around to lots of different places. For the last good chunk of time, I've been in California, and people immediately think LA, and I'm not in LA. I'm in Northern California. I always tell people Silicon Valley because we moved here. My husband and I moved here because my husband is a technologist. And so we're, kind of right in the heart of technology land. But then a few years ago, right before our first son was born, we moved just a little bit south of like where every single person you meet works at Google, because that's where we used to live. We lived in Mountain View, and I would go running on the trail past NASA and Google and all of that good, exciting tech stuff, which was really exciting. But every single person that you met worked in technology. I still have a lot of friends who work in technology, but I also have friends who are musicians and friends who are at-home parents. And, there are grandparents and retirees here because we moved just far enough south that you can afford to live here as as a retiree, which you could not, within walking distance from the Google campus. So it's California, and it's still very influenced by technology, but it's a little bit more relaxed. And not everyone is in technology. And I always say, as a writer, I always pound on the thing, setting is not a setting without a time. So we are just about to start October, which is my very favorite month of the entire year. I love Halloween. I love the autumn. I love all things spooky and mysterious. So I'm super excited that October is almost here.
Have you found over the years of living sort of immersed in the technological world, has that seeped its way into your writing in a particular way?
I think to a certain extent, I've benefited a lot. My husband loves to learn about technology. So like he got me into Scrivener, right? And all the different tools and supports that you need to do these things. So in that sense, yes. There's also been a couple stories that I've written. I can't remember which issue it was. A couple issues back, I wrote a story about a woman who is in technology, right? And so I think anytime I go more science fiction word, because I mostly do fantasy, but anytime I go science fiction word, it tends to be more technological in some part because I don't have, unlike my husband, I don't have a degree in astrophysics. I don't know a lot about outer space, like the nuts and bolts of what it would be like to be there. But I'm definitely absorbing the nuts and bolts of what it's like to be in a very rapidly advancing technological environment. And so I think when I reach for science fiction, I tend to reach for that kind of vibe, that kind of startup culture vibe, because I was definitely steeped in that for a long time.
And the character was part of a startup. I think
Yes,
I edited that. I think I worked on that
yes,
piece.
I think so. Yeah.
I loved that piece. And they were very attached to what their work and what they were, that was a big
Yeah.
piece of what was driving them in the story.
Yes, yes, and that's I mean, I've made lots of really good friends who are in the technology world. And there's some people for whom it's a job, and there's some people for whom it's really a passion and a way of life. And I've had great relationships with both, both kinds of people. But I think those kinds of people are very, very interesting because their whole lives, they're on a mission, really. And I think that just makes such a great character. Someone who's got a firm mission like that is just perfect for characterization.
Yeah, so like sort of obsessive, slightly
Exactly.
obsessive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, just to shift gears a little bit, what would you say is a relationship that's very alive for you right now? And I'm curious about
Yeah.
how it might impact your writing. I have an idea, but I'm not gonna guess. I'm gonna ask
You're
you.
not gonna get, well, to me, it's more a relationship that's coming back to life in some ways because this year our oldest son and our youngest son are both in elementary school, which means for the very first time ever, there's like an hour in the day, and my husband is working from home. So there's like an hour in the day where my husband and I can interact as adults as opposed to parents. And we had kids kind of late in life. So for most of our relationship, it was just him and me. And it was a very close relationship and also kind of a very intellectual relationship. Like we really liked to read things and discuss what we were reading and read things together. And, in between midnight feedings and like, getting dried jelly off the floor and all of the other things you have to do as a parent. Like everything that we talked about, it wasn't that more higher level intellectual conversation, I guess is what I'm saying. We were talking about the kids. And so just as of late August, we've had a chance to like start reading a book together at the same time. Like he's reading out loud to me again. And um, we're talking about going for a walk and having a long talk. We haven't gotten to that one yet, but we're watching a show together while we eat lunch that we can discuss, those kinds of things. And I think all of those things really kind of do impact my writing because as a writer and as a person, I don't know, my focus, like I'm focused on an imaginary world and on a character, and I'm a very internally focused person. And Brian, my husband, is a very like he's looking at the world. He's very interested in a much broader focus. And I think as a writer, I need that balance. I need that perspective. So having a little more time to have like grown-up conversations with him and to through him, I think connecting to kind of more like, okay, what's going on in the world? What's exciting now? What's the new book that's out? What's the new show that's out? I think all of that has been really good.
You see, it's so good I asked because it's just not. I thought you were going to talk about the kids. It's the opposite though. It's the lack
Yeah,
the lack of the children in a way,
it's
right?
the
But
yeah, well, I
their
mean,
absence.
yeah, it's a relationship. I don't want to say the relationship was dead, but it was just going in it was in a very different direction. So it was more like that more intellectual side of it. Like, the whole couple thing was all still there, but the more like intellectual, like let's read a book and discuss it. And what do you think is going to happen? Why did you think this happened? And all of those kinds of discussions, those were just sort of on the back burner for a little while. So it's feeling very alive to me right now, I guess, because it's feeling new. It's feeling like something we just got back.
I remember you used to, didn't you used to refer to it as book club with Brian?
Yeah, we did. We had like a little family book club. Sometimes my father-in-law would participate if it was a book we thought that he'd really like. But probably two things with my husband. We play music together and we read books together. Like that's the core, I think, of our relationship. And I think both of those things got a little were made more challenging by parenting. And it's been a while since we just sat down, after the kids go to sleep at night, we sit down and he reads out loud to me. And there's something, I think he was reading a parenting article the other day that talked about how like around the age my oldest son is, like around 7 or 8, a lot of parents stop reading out loud to the kids because the kids can read to themselves. And the article was advocating, no, keep reading out loud to your kid. And in some ways, I'm still being read out loud to, and that just feels like something very precious to me. That it's a connection, and the way like it's not just words on a page. At that point, it's a shared experience. And there's just something really cool about it. And it's something we've done together since before we were married. We sit down and he reads to me. So I just think it's a really cool part of our relationship, and I'm very happy to have it back.
It's so great. It's so great. And I don't think we hear about or see people reading to one another, adults in the
Yeah,
culture. And it is very particular experience, like you're saying. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it gives you a different experience of the work itself to hear it versus to read it.
Oh,
As well as the other person, right?
yeah. No, and I do a lot of audiobook reading too, because otherwise I would honestly never exercise if I didn't reward myself with audiobook time. But it's very different even than audiobook, because audiobook is a performance. And I think when you're reading out loud to someone, even when I'm reading out loud to my kid, there is an element of performance, but when you're really comfortable with someone, it's not just a performance, it's an experience. There's a sense of the person right beside you reacting to what you're saying. And my husband loves the way I react because he says I'm like a cartoon character when something like I whatever's happening, like I really get into the story. So I think he has a lot of fun seeing how I react. And again, it's like the difference between watching a movie and going to a play, right? You've got wonderful audiobook narrators, which I love. I love audiobook narration, but they're narrating to whatever imaginary listener they've, formed in their head, which is all fine and good. But when you've got someone right next to you, like on the edge of their seat, um, hanging on every word that you say, that's a very different, right? That's a very different thing. And I just think it's a cool thing to do together.
Have you ever heard anyone read your work to you?
To me. Um, No, I don't think so. I mean, little snippets, right? I think we did some promotional stuff for Hodgepodge where we did favorite sentences and like that kind of thing. So it does there's a little like tingle, right? But I don't think I've ever like heard someone read an entire one of my stories out loud or anything
I
like
mean, I,
that.
I asked this because I recently had an experience with a Substack friend of mine where she had an essay in an anthology, and it was very, very powerful for me. And on a total whim, I said, Sarah, I have to, I videotaped myself and I read her essay and I
Oh,
sent it to her. And she just was so touched, and it affected her in a really particular and very emotional way. And I
yeah.
was thinking, like, have I ever heard anyone read my stuff? I don't think so. But she was encouraging writers to read each other's stuff to one another because she's
Yeah.
a coach. She's a writing coach.
Yeah. Well, and it's different too, right? Because I haven't done too much live critique groups, but I know that's how critique groups work. At some, you'll go and you'll read your story to everyone, and I don't know. That's a very different vibe. That's like you're awaiting feedback or judgment, I think, in a way. But to hear someone else read your story, that would I would love to like do a critique group experience where that's what you did. Like you read someone else's short piece out loud. I wonder how that would be.
It would
I
be
think it would
very,
be
very
really
fun.
interesting.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so too. I mean, and just for the pleasure of it, like not necessarily
Yeah.
the reason. Just and there is something else about when I teach and I need to do this more for myself. I don't know why I'm resistant to it. When we read our own writing,
Out loud.
find out things about it I can't get any other way. It's revelatory about problems and issues, not just
Yeah.
dialogue. You think, okay, well, dialogue is going to show up, but there's other things too, right? Do you do that? Do you read your own stuff?
I'm also resistant to that, and I don't exactly know why either, except that I have a musical background, and to me, writing is a very, like, I'm always hearing it in my head when I'm writing. I think that's why I think I told you when we were working on this last draft, like, sorry about the commas. I have the hardest time with commas because to me, commas aren't rules, they're caesuras, they're pauses in the music. And that's like it's I'm hearing it in my head every time that I'm drafting, whenever I'm editing, I'm constantly hearing it in my head. So, I think something about saying it, reading it out loud feels like, okay, I've already done that to me in a way because I really am always, the sound of what I'm writing is always very alive for me when I'm writing. Nonetheless, there obviously it's not a full connect, right? When you're doing it in your head. So that's also something I'd like to do. It might have something to do with the fact that all of my stories are 7,500 words. And I'll need a large glass of water and a lot of time to do that. So that may be part of it
Apparently
too.
there's a function on Google where you can have it read it back to
Read. Yes.
my
Yes.
publisher actually told me this because she was like, did you do the thing with Google? I'm like, no, I didn't.
No, I know. I feel like that's also something that I should do. I need to find a shorter story that I'm gonna be doing some editing on and give it a go because right, it's also taking something outside of your own head, which is an important stage, an important step in the process is getting outside of your the echo chamber inside your own head.
Yeah, I'm going to just shift gears a little bit. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about a relationship between two characters in a story that you've written that you
Yeah.
just, I don't know, there's something precious and memorable about those.
Yeah. So I had to think a long time about this question because you gave me a heads up on what questions would be. And I noticed a really interesting pattern in a lot of my stories, which is I like to write romances that aren't romances. So I like to have a brother and a sister, and it's like a love story about a brother and sister, but it's obviously not romantic love. And I looked through and I saw this. A lot of my favorite relationships are like this. They're like love stories, but not love stories in the romance sense, but love stories in the sense of a different type of relationship. And so when I was looking through, I'm thinking through, and there's a story I published, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years ago now, and it was called Genius, and it's about like a little fairy sort of thing. And she was a muse. So, she was this like teeny tiny being, right? Like the size of a bug. I very much modeled her after a moth or a bug or something like that. And she was supposed to inspire a great potion master whose name was Vinificus. And so she was basically his muse. She inspired him to create like this uber potion kind of thing. And a long time ago, he had ended that relationship. I basically had it. She was like a bug, so she'd put a little thorn in him, and that's how they were connected. And one night, without warning, he ripped the thorn out, and her connection to him was gone. And so, this is many years later, she meets back up with him. And for one thing, it's a good relationship because it started off broken. She starts off really, really angry with him because it's basically, I mean, there's no way that relationship could have ever been romantic because she's this big and he's a human, right? Like it's not, but at the same time, all of her feelings were that of a jilted girlfriend, a jilted wife, there was a breakup. So I think that's probably my favorite relationship because she just started off so angry with him. A breakup had happened a long time ago in the past, and then she's basically locked in a room with this guy and not very happy about it. And her first instinct is, I want to get out of here, but she can't. And so what happens in that case? Like when you're stuck with someone that you don't want to be with, right? And she had a very good reason for not wanting to be with him. He'd done something terrible to her, right? And that was a fun one because she basically went back and learned that the things that had happened weren't exactly what she'd thought. And I think that's very true of a lot of broken relationships is that element of misunderstanding each other. And in this case, I like the relationship because the whole point of the story was working through that misunderstanding to understand each other again. And that it just makes me happy as opposed to like, something breaking apart. It was something that was already broken that was put back together. So I think for that reason, I remember it fondly.
Yeah, there's an optimism in that
Yeah.
arc. Um, so you work both as a writer and an editor, and I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think makes a good writer-editor relationship?
Ah, I think, I mean, obviously communication, but I think when an editor is excited about a story, I know for me as an editor, I'll read a story. Sometimes I love a story at first sight. Sometimes I'm looking through this and saying, I've got a sense of unease, like, okay, I haven't found where I connected with this story yet. But the moment that there's always a place. And the moment that I find that point where I connect with the story and what I really like about the story, that's my anchor. And then I know from there, okay, let's make sure nothing's detracting from this and that we're making this part that's really good shine the most we can. Um, as a writer, I really like it when an editor is willing to teach me stuff. I guess I'm still a student at heart. I think that's the best part about writing is that you're never done learning. Um, so I love it and I had a really great experience a couple years ago with an editor who just really, like, she scheduled a call and she said, we're going through this. And it was a novella. It was something like a 10,000 word novella. And she said, we're going to go through this line by line together. And I was kind of nervous. And as I recall, I had a newborn at the time. But I said, okay, we're going to do this. And I learned so much from her. Um, so I think the part about the communication is that you communicate your enthusiasm for the story and that both parties remain enthusiastic about the story because that's when it breaks down, right? When a writer or an editor starts to feel sick of a story or doesn't believe in the story anymore, that's not good. So I think there has to be that enthusiasm and love for the story and wanting to make the story better, but also I think wanting to make each other better as writers and editors, like learning more about the craft that you can apply to your next project, because ultimately especially as writers, it's all about the next project, right? That's all. I mean, we learn from the project that we're working on, and we need to take that information and run to the next project. And what are we going to do with what we learned? So I think not every editor writer relationship is necessarily a mentorship, but I think there's always some amount of learning that can happen. So I think that communication, enthusiasm, and what we can learn from each other, I think that's really the heart of it.
And as a writer, are there things, because I hear there's a lot of trepidation and fear often when a writer goes into a new experience with a new editor. And I'm trying to kind of gather tips for writers about how they can put something into that sphere that's going to kind of encourage a positive experience. And it's harder because we have less power in that dynamic. So
Yep.
what can we as writers bring into this sphere that's going to nurture something good happening?
Yeah. I think for one, putting our best work out there. I know sometimes sometimes I send and receive manuscripts that have had more or less work put put into them, right? So, I don't think editors love to receive manuscripts that are just so rife with, you know, a crit partner hasn't looked at it. You can kind of tell, right? And everyone's coming with different levels of experience, and some stories go better than others. But I think you can just tell when a writer has really put time and effort into something, as opposed to, isn't this a great idea? I've thrown it on the page, now you sort it out, right? And I don't think that's the best way to engage with an editor. Um, and then I think making sure that there is something in the story that is special and wonderful. And that's the deal with submitting too, right? That elusive, like, what is special about this? What is different about this? That's not what everybody else is writing. And to make sure there really is, that thing that the editor can connect with. Because I know, at least for me, I need to connect with the story before I can edit it. Otherwise, I'm just, correcting hyphens and commas and, you know, noting the run-on sentences, and until you're really connected with the story. So you have to remember that the editor is a reader too, and you need to make sure that whatever draft you're sending to that editor has something that's delighting them as a reader, because once that delight happens, then the editorial process can really go well.
Great. Tell us a little bit about working at with Hodgepodge as an editor, and how those relationships in the group have influenced the work that you've both written and work that you've edited. Like, how has it helped shaped you artistically, if it has in some way?
Yeah, so I think one of the neatest things about Hodgepodge, and I was lucky because, like I said, I was in from the ground floor, right? I was in from right away. And one of the neatest parts about it for me is seeing other competent, capable, but new to this people, just like me, say, well, I don't know what we're doing, but let's figure it out and give it a try and see what we can learn. And I think as writers, we're learning all the time. That's what I like about writing, is it's something you never stop learning as a writer. And sometimes, especially whether it's trying a new thing, trying a new style, a new technique. Like, I can remember when I was going back and saying, because I always write really long stories, and I said, okay, I'm going to try a flash fiction story, and I have no idea what I'm doing, because this isn't a 10,000 word novella. It's a 500 word story, a 750 word story. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I think there's lots of points where we don't know what we're doing, and the thing that's neat about writing is that you learn by doing it. If you don't do it, you're not going to learn. And you have to be okay with not getting it perfect the first time. So I think from my fellow editors, I've learned, like, okay, so this was our best guess. We did it. A, B, C, D, E didn't quite, in the beginning, we had long lists, right, of things that didn't go as well as we would have liked. But just that attitude of, because I know, at least for me, when I make a mistake, I'm very likely to get very upset and feel very bad and get lost in the wallowing of feeling bad, and be too guilty and ashamed to move forward. And just, there was none of that. It was like, we tried our best, we made a mistake, and let's move forward. And I also think that when we think about learning things, it can be like, okay, well, I learned I'll never do that again. That's not enough. So you, Gail, I learned from, like, you have you've got a template, you've got you've got a folder, you've got a process. Like, you have to, if you actually want to learn from things, you have to have some kind of process. You can't just continually make mistakes and say, okay, well, that kind of didn't work. So, I mean, maybe some people are intuitive enough to do that, but I think when you're working together as a group, which we are, that's never going to work. You have to have some kind of process. And we have a process. You've got your surveys that you send out to writers to get feedback from, and you're constantly checking in with us about what we could do better. We have Marco with, like, all of his organization and spreadsheets. And when we say, okay, we need to, next time we need to remember to send a reminder out to writers at this stage, so that we're not later on in trouble because no one's written their draft. And we don't just say that. Marco is inserting it into like he's got a to-do item and it's not going to get missed or forgotten. We've got Pam taking notes on all of the meetings and she's listening through all of the 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 joking and the chatting and everything else, and she's pulling out what's important and writing it down. I mean, I just think all of that stuff is really useful because it's not enough to just say, okay, we're going to do this and we'll learn from our mistakes. I think you need to have an actual process to learn, and I think and Hodgepodge does, which is one of the reasons that it works so well. So that's definitely one thing I've learned. And I've also learned because we have writers who are so different. You know what I mean? Like I'm not the only fantasy writer. Pam is not a fantasy writer, but she sometimes writes things that are pretty speculative. So seeing someone who's coming from the literary world, but with a speculative leaning is so super interesting for me. I think Marco also dips into spec fiction and reading one of his pieces that's like total, literary fiction, and then reading another one of his pieces where, you're going on a magical car ride or something like that. But I love his stuff because he comes from that more literary world. And so he's got almost kind of more of a magical realism take on fantasy, which I really love. Um, and looking at someone like Christine, who's coming from, I've read from her more of her, novel length fiction and stuff like that. But she's coming from such a perspective of, broad social understanding, I guess I want to say, where I come from such an I'm crawling inside another human when I'm writing, and she's really looking at the bigger picture. So and I love it when Christine edits me because her perspective is just so totally different from mine. Um, that I'm really liking that. So yeah, I think everyone is coming from kind of a different place, and there's a lot to be learned from that.
It's very cool to hear. I love these stories. Tell us a little bit about the story that you've done for this issue. And
For this issue.
I love the story so much. So
This story, so yeah, let me just grab a little water. Um, this story was supposed to be so easy because usually when I'm writing, where I get stuck is like I'm writing along and I'm like, where is the ending? And I try, nope, that's not the ending. Nope, that's the ending. I knew where this story was going. I knew everything that happened in this story and I understood it all. And I somehow seem to have a lot of trouble like getting it on the page, like explaining it in a way that readers could understand. So it was a fun story. But I also definitely in terms of learning, there was a steep learning curve on trying to figure out how to explain the story. It was an exciting story to write because we get the image prompt, which is to me one of the most fun parts of the whole hodgepodge thing is you have this image. And I was just our artist this time was so good. I could not decide. Like I'm looking at all of these images and I particularly love trees. I've always there's me in first grade. My first poem was about a tree. I write about trees. And here were all of these just amazingly inspiring images with trees in them. So I was very into trees. But I saw these two houses and I knew immediately that the occupants of those houses were brothers and that they were not in a good place in their relationship. I knew that. I knew all of these things just by looking at the picture. So to some extent the story kind of wrote itself because I just knew all of these things from seeing the picture. Um, and then I said, well, what's not going well between these brothers, and of course it had to be a girl. I knew that too, but I also knew that the brothers were very very old and at the end of their life, and I don't know exactly how I knew that. I just sort of did. I don't know if it's something because the artist had this kind of like, it's textile, which is the first time we've ever had this kind of textile art, and there's something, I don't want to say antiquated, but it's a lost art, right? It's not
But
something.
just the old-fashionedness.
Yes. Yeah, there's something, I guess it was something in that aesthetic. And I just and also like the way the they were like the little cottages of old men, just the way the little cottages were. I just knew that they were older brothers and that they'd had a falling out a long time ago and that it was time to resolve that. So I knew all of those things. Um, and then I guess because I'm a fantasy writer, I had to involve magic. And I think that's where I got in trouble because that's the fun part is where you're involving magic. But to me, the magic was just so obvious that I didn't do my best job the first time through explaining that. And I went through an iteration with my critique group. I went through a second iteration with my critique group because someone gave me feedback like a couple weeks later than I expected. So I went through a second read and then I got some feedback from you. And so I went through it. So I think I learned a lot about how to present the information because to me the world and the magic system like it was just all there. It was in the painting. I just saw all of it. But I think for someone who was again outside of my head, I had a little trouble figuring out how to get it all done. But I think in the end we got there. So it's good.
We got there. Yeah, it's that I love the relationships between the brothers, and at one point they're both hanging from the tree.
Yeah.
It was so like I have a memory of that from reading it. And there's so much imagistically happening that if I hadn't known that you had taken a prompt from a story, I would have thought, oh, she has a background in cinema or something. It was so visual. There was just so much imagistically that I
Yeah.
love.
Well, when I do a hodgepodge story, like again, I feel like I really crawl inside the painting. Like it's not just a light starting point for me. Like I feel as though the world itself evolves out of the image. Um, I feel like the image is a snapshot of this, is a snapshot of a scene from the story. And then my job is to figure out, well, how, what had to all come together to make that image, that's a scene from the story. So how did we get there? Um, and the idea again, I really love tree. A lot of my writing is still about trees. I don't know I guess I grew up in Iowa and looking out my bedroom window, like there were trees everywhere. There was a tree that scratched against my scratched against my window when I was little, and I'd hear it at night. I've just always felt very connected to trees for whatever reason. Um, and so I love this story prompt because the tree is personified in a way, right? The tree is the character in that painting. So I was immediately very excited to figure out, what is this character? Who is this tree? Um, and in some ways, that character was sort of, the tree is sort of flanked, right, by the two houses. And in some way, that character was sort of defined by the two brothers who lived in each of those two houses. So it was a lot of fun from that perspective to sort of, I don't want to say work backwards, but work inside um, that painting and figure out what it was that was calling to me. Something was calling to me there. I had to go find it. So
And I love that idea of crawling into the painting and finding out from the getting the information from the painting about what the rest of the story is about.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, because I'm trying to think back of some different stories I've read. Like for this one, you know, it's not like the opening scene. It's not really the ending scene. Like but it's always in there. Like there's always a moment in the story where that if it were a movie, like it's there in the story. I try to always make sure that it's there, that you could actually say, okay, yep, this is the moment in the story. That's the painting. And it's especially with fantasy, which has a lot of, world building and things like that. The tree, I mean, obviously, I had the magic handed to me, right? Like trees don't fly. Why is this tree flying? Um, so when I was working out the magic system for that, the other thing that I really felt with that story was a sense of, I don't know why, but I really felt a sense of isolation to a certain extent, but also connection. I got both things off of it, and that's kind of what my magic system ended up being because it was a little town that had closed itself off from the rest of the world, but it was thinking it's not that the rest of the world vanished. The rest of the world was still there was a sense of the rest of the world being there, but it was just closed off and a sense of opening back up, I think, to the outside world. Because you didn't there was that hill there and what was over that hill. In some ways it didn't matter. In some ways the painting was just about that scene, but there was also the suggestion of that greater world beyond it. And I think that's where the magic system came from because I just had this sense of an insular place, but an insular place that hadn't forgotten there was a bigger world outside. And a place that was wrestling with whether or not it wanted to belong to that bigger world. So I don't know how with thread and weaving we managed to express all that, but that's at least that's what I brought to it, and took away from it.
So great. Any advice that you might have, relationship advice for writers?
Relationship advice for writers. So when we did the webinar with Brooke the other day, on Inked Voices, she was talking about how, some writers have a lot of trouble getting into their writing. And she and I both kind of connected. I have a lot of trouble coming back out. I guess I kind of go in deep. Even if I just only have an hour to write, even if kids are screaming in the other part of the house and I've like, got the ear defenders on, whatever. For me, coming out is really hard and connecting with people when I come out of that space. And sometimes I'm just not, I don't know, I'm still in my own world. I'm still in my own headspace. And especially now that I have kids, like I pop out the earbuds and I close my laptop and I can hear, right? I can hear I can hear like who's stolen what toy from or whatever's going on or, you know, um, so I think like kind of reintegrating with the people in your life after you're coming out of your writing space. I think you need some kind of ritual or routine for that. Like I always at the very least, like I always, put away all of my headphones and close my computer and like brush my teeth or go to the bathroom. I always do something. Even if I hear like that my husband and children need me, I always take that extra minute just to I need it. I need it just to kind of come back to this world and this reality. Because I think as writers, we can really go in, be very internal. And I know that if I jump immediately into my family relationships after doing that, then I'm just going to be out of sync and it's not going to be right. So I like to have some kind of little ending and re-entry ritual, some kind of even if it's just like, carrying my stuff back out, plugging in all of my computer and everything like that, just some sort of ritual that signals to me, okay, now I'm done with that interior, part of my relationship with as a writer with my story. My relationship with my story is closing and my relationship with my kids and husband is opening back up. So I think that would be the main thing is just even if it's just 1 minute, give yourself some kind of little ritual to transition back.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and sort of do it the same way every time, right? So
Yeah.
that's my ending, and then my beginning to this other thing. If people would like to read more of your stuff, where can we
Yeah.
find it? And I'll post this in the notes.
Yeah.
Just to
So I have my website, heatherpagano.com, very inventively named. And I'm have links to stories there. Of course, I've got stories in every issue of Hotchpotch. And I write about writing. I write about all of this learning process and writing stuff. I write every week. I have a Substack post, which I think is substack.heatherpagano.com. So I'm always talking about what I'm reading to my kids, um, what I'm writing. So I talk about all of that stuff on Substack. So that's updated every week. So that's another great place to check out and check in with what I'm doing.
and you also have several novels out, yes?
Oh, yep, and I've got yeah, thank you. Yes, I've got some no novellas. I've got some novellas up on Amazon. Yeah, I've got a fantasy series that I'm publishing on Amazon. So yeah,
fantastic. Thank you, Heather. It's such a pleasure
Thanks.
to talk, and it's so fun to learn like stuff that doesn't come up in our normal co
Absolutely.
colleague relationships. So thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.